If you're listening to this podcast, it means you're ready, no, more than ready, to have a major breakthrough in your business. You're hungry for change and you're hungry for growth, and that's why you're feeding your mind right now with all this valuable information. But to drive those changes, to be really smart about what you're doing and to make the right choices before you take massive action, you need help from someone who's been there, someone who's going to coach you through it, even just someone to get you started on your journey. That's why Tonny Robbins is offering a free one-to-one business strategy session from one of his top business coaches, a $600 value, completely free, no strings attached. That's right, if you're listening right now, you can go to TonyRobbins.com/CEO and sign up for a free session with a member of Tony's team who's helped business owners like yourself overcome their obstacles and set them on the path to success. Hey guys, welcome back to the Tonny Robbins podcast. I'm Anna Jorg, editorial director for Robbins Research. This week, we're diving into artificial intelligence and machine learning, phrases that are getting tossed around a lot these days. But how much are we really understanding? Helping me demystify the hype and break down the pragmatic benefits of AI is Ben Lamb. Ben is the CEO of Hypergiant, a Dallas-based startup that Tonny himself invested in. They're working with big brands and businesses to bring in technology to solve real business problems. For instance, Hypergiant recently teamed up with TGI Fridays to create this AI-powered mixologist, appropriately dubbed Flanagan. Flanagan offers customers the experience of personalized drink recommendations while simultaneously collecting more data about their preferences. It's a win-win because it enhances customer connection and ultimately customer loyalty. I talk with Ben about these types of practical applications of artificial intelligence and machine learning, and we explore other opportunities for businesses to leverage the tech to best meet their customers' needs. Because most industries are actually using really outdated practices. And as we enter this new era of AI solutions, it's time to initiate change and encourage your team to start thinking forward. Welcome, Ben, to the Tonny Robbins podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Of course. So we're really excited to learn about your latest company called Hypergiant, which Tonny Robbins is an investor in, and it's one of the things he's most passionate about in the coming year. It launched with this goal of bringing the power of AI or artificial intelligence to big brands. But this is a space that people really don't know a lot about. And I'd love it if you could just tell us more about the company, what it does, and how we should think about artificial intelligence.
Yeah, so big question, lots to unpack there. Hypergiant, kind of started out of this need where we've seen kind of the rise and fall of artificial intelligence, over the last decade, really, where people are starting to look at, how can we use machines and how can we leverage data in interesting ways where machines can take all of this data and actually start looking for inferences, looking for correlations, and actually, not just automating processes, but also, giving humans better data for them to actually make decisions. And so what was interesting for us is we've seen Watson, we've seen all these kind of big system integrators start to go into the space, but, AI has turned into kind of, this feeling of big data 2.0. So I don't know if you remember 5 or 7 years ago where everything was big data. Everything looked like a big, when everyone had a big data hammer,
Yes.
everything was a big data nail. And so it kind of started to remind us of that, where people were like, I need AI, I have to have AI, but I don't think they actually knew what that meant. And then when they started thinking about AI and they started talking to PhDs, they started talking to some of these big system integrators, it really turned into, okay, we've got to restructure all of our data. We have to ingest all of our data, and then we can start to see what inferences we can get. And it just sounded a little magic boxy. It sounded, super hypey. It sounded super exciting, where it's on one side, you've got this world where AI is going to, people are saying in the news that, AI is going to destroy everything. You've got people like Elon, they're saying AI is the devil. And then you've got other people that, are saying, Elon, or that other people are saying that, AI could take people's jobs. And so there's all of these emotions about it, but there's this excitement about it. So it's kind of this weird space where there's incredible excitement about it. People are super excited about kind of what the potential could be, but there's still just this kind of, mass confusion. And
Yeah,
so
I love that
we
you
saw
call it like an emotional charge because that's something that at Tony Robbins events everybody knows is that you're driven by emotion and people ultimately we think that we're rational creatures, but ultimately we buy feelings, not things, right? And
exactly.
emotion drives action like nothing else. I thought it fascinating too. You said in an interview that AI is a drug that nobody knows what it does, but everybody is trying to get it, and
Yeah, they
everybody
want it.
feels that they need it, but nobody knows exactly what to do in terms of how to get there and who to hire and all the logistics. So it's like, making an emotional decision. I need this, but you have no idea about the how. Yeah.
Exactly. And so and it's funny that you say that. And I knew that about, y'all's content, but, we always say that, great ideas are really important, but also passion really sells deals. And so we're obviously very passionate about the space, but we saw this opportunity and we are like, okay, AI is confusing, it's nebulous, it's kind of dark. How can we kind of be this, guiding light for the Fortune 500s? And then how, in being that the space is so big, how can we create something that's, really, impactful, but also, has the opportunity to work with startups, has the opportunities to look at market trends and build products, and then also think about how we can service some of these, big Fortune 500s and even smaller companies and get them kind of into AI and kind of start to demystify AI and de-hype AI and really just kind of roll up our sleeves and say, okay, AI is not this magic thing that people throw around. It's actually just a tapestry of technologies, and it's a different way of looking at data, right? So it's like, I'm going to butcher this quote because it's not, and I didn't do this, but there's some research quote that I've heard like 1,000 times, been in the news. It's like every year now, humanity like collects more data than ever before in like the history of all humankind, including the year before. And so with all of that data, AI is really just a way to kind of start to use algorithms, start to use technologies where we can start to sift through data, look at correlations that may have been there, but the technology wasn't in a place where we could actually find it. One of my favorite things about AI, one of my favorite stories was this was, I think it was last year, where NASA announced we found 5 new planets, but they didn't go out and like you know build out a new telescope or leverage new technologies. I think they worked with Google and just literally used deep learning and machine learning technologies to go through tons of data that they had that was actually 5 years old to
Wow.
find these planets. So like the discovery of these planets was there, and
Yeah.
so
We're
there's
sitting on
all
our
of
answers. We just
it,
aren't. Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
And so we try to, and so we thought, well, why don't we start a company that, could really be pragmatic when it comes to AI, where we could demystify it, where we can go in to like a company like TGI Fridays or Schlumberger or whoever and say, you don't have to spend, $20 million and a 3-year data restructuring, data scrubbing project just to get to the point where, you can now start to experiment. Like, let's look at, predictive data analytics. Let's look at machine learning. Let's look at, bite-sized pieces and like really crawl, walk, run, because that's where you're going to start to see true justification around, the ROIs of these technologies. And then you can start investing more, right? So it's like, how can we be really smart and pragmatic and say, we don't need a magic AI bullets that's going to transform our entire company. Your company's fine, or you wouldn't be in business.
Yeah.
So like let's find really interesting places where there's data opportunities, to leverage a lot of this, automation technology and machine learning to make it better and gain insights, and then let's keep scaling, right? And so our whole goal with was Hypergiant was to really do 3 things, be that guiding light for services for the Fortune 500, and then we want to look at practice what we preach, right? So like let's look at the data that we get when we work with 10 oil and gas companies or 10 entertainment companies or 10 restaurants, and then based on those trends and data that we see, why don't we then start to build off the shelf type products that we can take that kind of solve more macro trends in the industry. And then last is, we have a venture arm where, while Tony and other people invested in us, we're also looking at, there's a lot of great girls and guys that are solving really targeted problems in AI. And, let's go find those companies. I've done a bunch of different companies over the years. I've invested in a lot of different startups. Let's actually, find really great startups make some investments in them, and then bring them in as a part of the solution into these companies. So then, kind of helping these big brands, interact with awesome AI startups.
Yeah, I love that you have this sort of three-pronged attack, because I think a lot of the frustrations that business owners have is they'll hire somebody to come in and look at their data, look at their processes, and it's traditional consulting, right? That's the traditional
Right.
consulting model. And then they say, okay, this is your problem, this is your solution, and then they don't actually execute on the solution because they don't have the products built or they don't have access to these innovative niche startups that are creating technologies that can then be applied to solve that problem. So it's really interesting. And then you're also not going the straight up product route either. It's like a blend of the two, or rather the three. So when you approach a client, do you have a particular, given that you have these, three incredible, I'd say a three-pronged attack, right? But you've got these three arms that are all helpful to help you solve problems that clients have. Do you have like a particular process or a way that you approach businesses that's unique? Like, how would you evaluate a potential client and how do you start thinking about what solutions to bring them?
No, it's a great question. The reason why we did this kind of three-pronged approach is that we don't believe that we have all the answers. Like, I don't know if everyone that is the CEO and founder of an AI company says that, but we don't have all the answers. There's great people out there that are solving different problems. We want to invent some technology. We'll probably leverage other technology. So that's why we kind of had this three-pronged approach of like, I think there's different tools for different problems. And so, when we go into a company, this is going to sound super cheesy, I feel, but it's true, is we listen. We just go in and listen. One of the biggest things that, it's been very polarizing in the industry where some people are like, we absolutely love his stance on this. And then other people are like, we absolutely hate his stance on it. But my view is that, so much of AI, at least in recent years, is technology first. It's not been business first. They go in and it's like, I have, a natural language processing solution. And so every problem you have is a
Yeah.
natural language processing thing. And so we try to, we really, while we viciously love technology and we love artificial intelligence and we love all of the facets of that phrase, we ultimately, we're here to help businesses, right? And so the first part of what we do is really just go in and listen and educate. And so it's funny, people ask me like, well, is IBM your competitor, or is Deloitte your competitor? Who's your competitor? And I would say our biggest competitor is just education. And so we
Hmm.
go in and really try to educate them on like what is the art of the possible, like not all of this snake oil and magic bean AI stuff that they've seen in movies. And then we just listen to them. Like, what are the types of things that you are trying to solve? And then we try to blend those two. And so it's really a combination of like early education and kind of teaching them that these words actually mean things and words actually matter, and then listening to what their goals are as a business, and then finding the right ways to kind of weave our solutions and technologies together with the KPIs and whatever is kind of driving their core business decisions.
Yeah, I love that approach. And I think that's actually something that so many business owners would really appreciate. And I hope that now there's sort of a shift in business communication. And instead of going into a potential client and having, confirmation bias and thinking, okay, well, here's what I have to sell. How am I going to shape their problem so that it fits my solution? And then also going in with this attitude of, what we used to think was the right way to approach deals, which was confidence, right? Okay, I have
Right.
absolute confidence that my way is the right way, and that's the old model, and I mean it worked for years, right? Like that's the heart of sales.
Right.
But this is fascinating because, and like I said, I hope that more companies start to adopt this way of listening. And Tony actually has a whole series that he writes about on meta programs and understanding people's, do you have an internal or an external frame of reference? Do you move toward or away something? So it's really getting into neurolinguistic programming and understanding how people are thinking and how they're communicating with you, and then figuring out how, the solution from after this deep listening, right? It's called deep listening.
Right.
How you can then present them with the solution to the problem, but you can't know the solution unless you've deeply listened, and not just to what they're saying, but to what they're really saying, right?
Right.
So I love that approach. I think it's something that's, extremely essential. And again, something business owners really appreciate.
Yeah, and we kind of, we do that kind of wrapped in this brand of retrofuturism, right? And so, like, if you look at our marketing and you look at how we're talking about the space, and you look at kind of even just like, the mint and yellow colors, is like,
Yeah.
we had this, there was this like, retrofuturism art style where, it's like that utopian future that we were all promised, like flying cars and
Mm-hmm.
hoverboards and self-lace up shoes. It's like, and so, our whole thing is like, even down to kind of how we're, not just solving these problems and technologies that we're building, but actually even talking about it and representing ourselves is like, we really try to hold ourselves even, at the brand level to this standard of, we were promised this awesome world. Where is it?
Yeah.
And so,
Yeah.
in a world where there's mistrust in media, and there's a world of, mistrust in data, and there's always kind of news coming out, we really want to kind of hold Hypergiant to the standard of how can we really help businesses kind of usher in kind of this kind of, fourth industrial revolution of intelligence. And so, we really loved kind of our retrofuturism style, and it's not just a, colors on a business card or on a website, but it kind of goes to kind of the cultural zeitgeist of like what we're trying to achieve here, at Hypergiant, and really make sure that, like, companies know that it's not just us selling a service or a solution or a product. It's really us, it is our dog food, and we are eating it. And, we want to hold ourselves to the standard of don't get lost in the hype. Like, there's this awesome world, like, let's go leverage these technologies to build it.
Yeah. That's right. That's the first time, because I know hypergiant, right, is the astronomical meaning of it, but I didn't actually look at the word hype as
Yep.
part of your name. And I love the thoughtfulness that you put into the brand. And I think that's something that a lot of CEOs and business owners and people who are just starting businesses need to think deeply about. It's not just about what you're delivering, it's also about the psyche and the cultural mindset at the time
Right.
of your audience. And I like, the retrofuturism.
100%.
It's fascinating, right? Because we were promised this amazing world, and yet the first thing that happens that sort of reminds us that it's not this utopian society that was promised to us, like a self-driving car, killing somebody on the street, or what's another sort of wake up moment? Oh, Facebook, right? What's happened
Cambridge
recently to
Analytica. Yeah.
Facebook? Exactly. Yeah, I know. I'm like, that's
Yeah.
the elephant in the room that everybody's talking about right now. And there's a statistic that I ran across that was 91% of executive decision makers anticipate significant barriers to adoption of AI. Is that something that I mean, it almost sounds like on a business level, there's a lot more hesitation around it than there is on a consumer level. Like consumers, like yes, 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 like let's move into the future. But what is the hesitation on the side of businesses?
Well, I think it's a little bit of, I think you're 100% right. But I think that the reason for it, and this is just kind of my speculation, is we went through kind of this like back end modernization that occurred with the rise of mobile. So everyone needed a mobile app. Everyone couldn't get it fast enough. Everyone was selling mobile apps. I was obviously in that space for a while. But what was interesting is that companies didn't just have to go build a mobile app. They didn't have to just go find a company to do it. They also had to completely rethink. Okay, the mobile app has to do something. So we have to tie into backend services. We've got to worry about security. So there's this entire, what the rise of mobile. There was this in the Internet of Things. There's this entire kind of legacy. I've got to redo all of our backend APIs so that external services can talk to it, right? And so that was painful because mobile went really, really fast. And so if you now look
Yeah.
at technologies like AI that have all of this promise, and then you start talking to some of the, initial leaders and the big consulting firms out there that were talking about AI, a lot of them look like big data, projects. And it kind of gave them, I assume it kind of gave a lot of companies kind of heartburn of like, okay, I've got to go spend, $20 million in 3 years to see what happens, right? And
Yes.
so I think that a little bit of kind of the mysticism and confusion in the space, coupled with some of these big price tags early on by couple individual companies,
Yeah.
has caused people to be like, okay, we're really excited about it. We need it. Our board's asking for it. Our
Hmm.
investors are asking for it. The press is talking about it. But I don't want to be subject to a massive bill in 3 years to then come out and say, okay, it didn't really do anything.
Yeah.
And so I think I'm actually really happy that there's that skepticism, because it really gives us an opportunity to come in with this different approach, and it's really resonating with businesses. And so I think that, the while the skepticism is definitely there, um I think it actually gives, for us, we look at it as a really great opportunity, because customers are actually trying to learn from kind of the lessons of Big Data 1.0, and learn from their kind of, entire API modernization and the rise of mobile. And so some of those, scars are still a little fresh, because
Yeah.
I mean, that wasn't that long ago. And
Hmm.
so I think companies are like, actually trying to learn and be educated on these technologies, which is awesome.
Yep. And I think too, you said there was a lot of over promising and under delivering. In some cases too, they were trying to tackle projects that were just enormous. And I think what I'm interested in hearing about, and I think our audience is as well, is, instead of having to rejigger your entire strategy to fit the solutions that AI offers, there are small things that you can do, right? Like kind of go back to the root of test and iterate. So, for instance, Tony Robbins, we have a messenger bot. So you can go
Right.
on Facebook Messenger and you want to know when the next event is, or you want to get updates from this podcast or from the blog, you can get those automatic updates. And that's a relatively minor technology it just complements your business. It grows your
Right.
business in small ways. It expands your engagement in small ways. It has the potential to make massive impact in the future, but it doesn't, you don't have to change anything that you're currently doing in order to fit that in. What are some of the things that you guys have done or are doing with clients that you can speak about, that are examples of, small things that you can do?
Yeah, so I'll use the TGI Fridays, because we can talk about it publicly. It's getting great reviews.
Yeah.
People think it's sexy, and
Uh-huh.
it is. But I'll tell you. But when I tell you about the data and what it actually does, you're gonna be like, oh, that's actually the sexy part, not
Yeah.
the AI mixologist. But
Yep.
TGI Fridays, which I think everyone knows from the '90s and before, right? This like awesome restaurant that's kind of like one of America's restaurants,
Oh,
like
for sure.
one of
Classic.
their main one of their main executives, Sharif, says, he loves to say that we're actually like a 50-year-old startup, and we're reinventing ourselves, and we're the only restaurant that owns the day of the week. And so they see that there's this kind of like interesting, awesome kind of modernization that's going on at this brand. And so when we went in and started talking to them about artificial intelligence, because they were really just excited about it, but kind of like I mentioned earlier, with a healthy skepticism, they're like, what's actually possible, and like how could AI really help us drive value to our customers. And so then we just started talking to them, and listen and really listening to them, and trying to understand what are their goals. And what was great about Fridays is they know who they are, they know what they were, they know who they want to be, and there's kind of this entire kind of remodernization, not just from a technology perspective, but also from like an in-store perspective. They were redoing all the restaurants, a lot of the tchotchke type stuff's going away, and it's kind of they still want to be kind of that neighborhood happy hour about apps and social with your friends, right? It's a place
Yep.
that they want you to come into the bar and also have great food.
Yep.
The bar is kind of central to kind of what their vision is from the past and for the future. And so they told us, that their goal was, how do we get people, into the restaurant, into the bar with their friends, and how do we better serve them? And then how do we know more about them so that we can better serve them, not in a, creepy Facebook way, but in a real way. Like, how can I, better serve
Yeah, meet
Ben?
their needs. Yeah.
Exactly,
Yeah.
and meet them where they are. And so we came up with this concept called, Project Flanagan, which is really an AI mixologist. So then, obviously, when we announced it, the press is like, AI mixologist, it's amazing. It's a bartender
Yeah,
from
with an
like a
Irish
movie.
name.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And like we just kind of named it from cocktail.
Yeah, yeah.
And some of you are too young to know what I'm talking about.
But that's okay.
But but our whole thing is like, well, if we're going to focus in the bar and we want to focus on consumers, you've got a new app, you've got loyalty, you've got all these different things. Why don't we try to start to understand kind of, what are people's flavor palettes, right? Like what are people buying in different regions? What are you as a loyalty member, buying from a food perspective? What are you drinking? So we can really do two things for the user initially. Number one, we can recommend great drinks to you based on what the season is, what other people are doing, time of day, your specific flavor profile. We can start to recommend drinks for you that maybe you didn't know or try. But then also, we ingested a lot of different data from TGI Fridays, you know, uh, data sets and their kind of executive bartenders, and we train the system so that we can actually make the system can actually make drinks. Now, will all of them be amazing and perfect? Probably not, but we could actually make like the Ben Lamb cocktail, right? And then
Hmm.
I can take that and say, oh, this is a cocktail that maybe it's I'm not a bartender, but maybe it's partly margarita and maybe a hint of mojito or something like that, and I'm like, oh, this came together really well. And based on kind of the rule sets that we gave the system and the data we gave the system, and then my particular kind of ordering history and flavor palette and kind of the way I've trained the system personally, I could come up with like a drink that may be awesome, and I could share it with my friends. And it's like, hey, go try the Ben Lamb cocktail. Here it is. And you could go in and experience that custom drink, and then maybe there could be some magic drink that TGI Fridays actually discovers out of this. And so that's
Mm.
awesome for the user. But then also for TGI Fridays is they can say, not only is there one awesome drink that comes out of this that we can put on our menu, or name after a customer, but interestingly enough, we can start to say, okay, well, in the summer in Texas, 80% of our population aren't
Yeah.
drinking bitter drinks. So
Yeah.
we need to
Adjust.
bring more sweet cocktails and other types of cocktails and refreshing drinks to the forefront. And I think some people could say, well, that's you should just know that, but unless you actually look at the data, you're just kind of guessing, right? And so
Yeah.
and making a lot of assumptions. And so they can actually start to look at a macro level, and look at all these different correlations to better service their customer. And then you, as a customer, can have a really individual experience, right? And so the more you spend time, with the system, the more it knows you, the more it can recommend. And then over time, I think there's probably opportunities to take that to the food category and other things. Obviously, making drinks is much easier than a preset menu.
Hmm.
But there's a lot of implications from that. And so while it sounds like sexy of like, oh, an artificial intelligence mixologist, it's really just about looking at data and making it's really almost like a humanization for the customer for TGI Fridays, which I think is pretty awesome.
Yeah. Where are the data points coming from? Because I think a lot of businesses struggle with like input, right? Like how do they get the data? You mentioned order history, but is there anything else?
Yeah, so right now, so we still, we believe that, and I think all kind of training data, and I think that's where we kind of get into this world of, big data 2.0. It's like, because people are like, well, our data is not good. Well, is it? You can also collect new data. If you have, 1,000 restaurants, you can start collecting new data. You don't always have to use legacy, right?
Hmm.
And so it's a combination of, their menus and historical ordering data, but then for you as a consumer, we're using reinforced learning. So when it recommends a drink, it then the system asks you, did you like the drink? Could you score the drink? What did you not like about it? What did you love about it?
Mm.
Because while we can take all this data on mixologists and we can take all this data about, historical orderings and make recommendations based on, what people have historically ordered with this food type or whatnot, we still need you as a person to kind of reinforce that, right? Like we can't
Yeah.
like magically know what you love. You're like, I like, whiskey drinks versus bourbon drinks. Like even if all the data suggests from a grouping perspective that in a trend perspective that most people that order these types of things like you did once bourbons, we can make some of those inferences, but we also need you as a human to just say, yeah, this was great, or no, that wasn't great, so that we can, continually not hone the data set for the whole, but also for you as an individual.
Yeah. And I think a big pain point for businesses is how do we get more data about our customer because they know full well that how important it is to really understand your client, right? And use that information in order to better serve them. But one of the problems is, we want more in our CRM, we want, more robust data sources and the whole deal. And they talk about surveys and ways that they can gather data through, multiple sources. And it's a bit overwhelming, to be honest. But what the missing piece, it sounds like, is you can get that data as long as you make it clear that the client is going to benefit from it. And so
Right.
if you're using it to serve them on the front end, right? Okay, this is going to create deeper personalization and customization for you, then they're going to be 10 times more likely to offer that up because they get an immediate benefit. They get that gratification. They're not just saying, "Hey, we're going to gather your data so that you can, you can go into
So
our
we can do weird
database."
stuff with it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly, exactly. Yeah, you got to
exactly.
give. You got to
And I
give to
think
get.
yeah, and I think people get, and I think like historically companies are like, oh, we need more data on our customer. We need more data on our customer. And I'm like, do you? Like,
Mm,
or do you need the right data on your
yeah.
customer? Like, do you need more? Do you need to know that like they're a part of this soccer club? Do you really need to know that? Or do you, if you're TGI Fridays, do you need to know what they like? Or do you need
Yeah.
to know when they want to eat? Like, what's their eating habit? Like, you need to know different data. And I think that there's kind of been, to your point, this like, oh, we've got to collect more data. And then, in this world that we're kind of living in with Facebook and with the election and everything else,
Hmm.
people, are kind of, nervous about their data, and they should be, right? And so, to your point, which I think said it perfectly, there's got to be that give and get. Like, I want to build trust as a customer of TGI Fridays with Fridays, and the only way I'm going to do that is if I know that the things I give them, I get out of it, and I respect that relationship, and I respect the data that I'm giving them. And so, collecting data for the sake of collecting data is just weird and creepy, right? And so,
Hmm.
on a customer, and so I think that you've got to really build that trust, and you've got to make sure that you're asking for things that make sense. Because like, if an app or software or a brand asks me for data, then I'm like, why do they want to know that? Like, that's
Hmm.
just weird. Like, it's weird,
Hmm.
and I don't even trust that. I'm in the space, and so you've got to make sure that you kind of have that authenticity and trust, and that's gonna be based on kind of that give gets model that you talked about.
Yep. So that's a great example, and that's something I think everybody can relate to. Are there any other, and these don't have to be, clients that exist today, but when you guys think about the possibilities, what are some other examples from other industries, like, I don't know, medical services or real estate, or I'm just thinking about the industries that our audience is in, and at the size and scale too of different types of businesses, because our audience is not necessarily from Fortune 500 companies, but rather business owners who are either just starting up or maybe, and this is what I loved what you said about TGI Fridays being such an iconic brand, but that is continuing to modernize because a lot
Mhm.
of people who attend, specifically Tony Robbins's business event, they have sort of legacy businesses that they want to bring into, the future and are not 100% sure how to do that because they're still at that medium size. They're not enormous yet. So how do they begin to think about how AI could benefit their business? Like, what are some sort of creative ideas when you guys riff and just talk about what the possibilities are? What are some things that you guys have come up with?
Yeah, so I got to give credit to, I won't say the company or say the person, but one of the, because we're not talking about it yet publicly, but I have a long-term friend that came to me a couple months ago, and I thought we were just catching it for lunch, and we weren't,
Never
which is
ends up
great.
that way.
I love this
Yeah.
guy, and I love that, he actually, had looked at the space. He's in real estate, he's in one of the biggest real estate investment funds, but that,
Hmm.
it's like a lot of these big real estate things that nobody knows, like no one's heard of.
Hmm.
And he was like, is there a way that we can use machine learning and AI related technologies, which I was impressed that he even started with that question that way,
Yeah.
to, not saying I want to do this or I've heard of this, but it's like, is this even possible? Can we understand like correlations so that we understand what our of like market trends and rates like historically, like can we ingest that data and know what our exposure risk is, the market tanks by this percent or interest rate changes? Because right now he's like, we don't know what our exposure is in Louisiana. He's
Hmm.
like, so like, he's like, if we have one of our limited partners call us and they say, what's our exposure on this, on the properties that we own in Louisiana? He's like, we call analysts and we kind of go figure it out for them. But he's like, that's not in real time or even near real time. It's like it takes a couple days.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, wait, so you're telling me that you guys and other real estate companies have, hundreds of millions of dollars or $1 million or $1 billion, regardless of whatever scale, it's still the same. But you're actually understanding, or you're actually like, there's not any way that people are pulling that data together and doing correlations against it and making recommendations. They're like, systems aren't doing that. And they're like, no. He's like, we don't even. He's like, we kind of email spreadsheets all to each other.
Wow.
And I was like, are you serious? Like this is amazing
Yeah.
because it's a huge opportunity. And so that's an example of like, I think that a lot of times like real estate's, while it's great and we all use it, it's sometimes a lagging industry,
Oh,
right?
for
And so
sure. Yeah.
and
Very
so
traditional.
we see regardless of whether you're, buying and selling a couple houses or you're doing, international, casino type development, whatever scale, they're still using really antiquated old systems. And a lot of it's just kind of manual labor where you're like, taking in, data and putting it in spreadsheets and emailing them around. And then one mess up in the spreadsheet could throw off everything, right? And so there's just a lot going on, but a lot of that could kind of be automated, right? And so what I loved about the lunch, it wasn't that we had this massive solution that we're going to go kind of work on together, but it was just the fact that this guy that's not in technology, that is, in, just one of the partners at a real estate investment fund said, is it possible, right? And so I think those are the questions that, small, medium, and, large cap companies all across the scale need to understand is like, start asking, is it possible? And then doing the research and being educated, because it's amazing that, someone that was from this, super antiquated old school industry called me and said, I was doing research on this and I kind of think it's possible, but I just want to know, right? And so it's that kind of curiosity around these technologies that could lead to us partnering or them partnering with someone else or whoever to build this like massively transformative thing for the entire industry, right? And
Yeah.
push the entire industry forward. And I think that's what's, super interesting kind of about the space of kind of like what the ripple effects could be, from like just one person saying, is this possible?
Yep. Now, what role was he in at that firm?
So he's a manager. So I mean, he's not like
Mm-hmm.
the main guy of like the whole thing and like
Mm-hmm.
CEO. I mean, he's just in the, he just was researching and saw, and he's like, you guys are doing AI. I don't fully understand it, but this is what I, you know, gleaned from, doing some research in this on what's possible. And here's how we look at data. And he's like, and then he kind of walked me through the process of like, how they understand their exposure risk in certain areas. And I was like, that's a lot of work.
Yeah.
And he's like, yeah. He's like, he literally told me, is why I won't say his name. He's like, he literally told me that he's like, I Googled macros and put all these spreadsheets together. And then I created a PowerPoint that was just a dashboard. And they were like, we have to walk this up to the CEO and show it to him that you are the smartest person here. And I was like, well, that's awesome for you. It's awesome that you're pushing forward. But he was like, that wasn't that hard. And it was so amazing to this industry. Right. And so, yeah, and I mean, he's in midway in the company and just said, is this possible? And, now we're meeting with their leadership team and talking to them about kind of what is possible. And it's great, but it all started with, hey, the way we're doing it seems like a lot of work and machines could probably help take some of this off our plate and make it better.
Yep. I mean, I think you just hit upon something really key for particularly for medium-sized businesses is it is not the CEO's responsibility to to sort of facilitate or enable these sort of change initiatives, right? Like it is not all on you as a business owner to do that. And we actually have, Tony has a whole thing around how to encourage employees to innovate. So how to build a culture of positive change. And I think one of the most important things is look at your leadership team, look at your managers, give them a sense of ownership, not just over the day to day, right? So, okay, here's what you need to, here's your output for the day, right? Like this is head down execution, in execution mode. It's really important to give your leadership team the not just like the space to innovate, but also sort of like the emotional encouragement. Like, hey, each of you is an ownership. So you've got marketing, accounting, like
Right.
IT. There's innovation within IT, but people often look at IT as the space from which all technology ideas need to come, and that's just not the case, because you, as a manager over your particular department and your employees, you know what your pain points are. I mean, every time you hit send and there's these spreadsheets attached to an email, a little bell should be going off in your head, and you should be thinking there has to be a better way. And that comes from you, right? It does not come from anybody above you or below you. It comes from you. You need to take ownership over innovation. And I
No,
think that's a, yeah, sorry, go
you're
ahead.
no, you're 1,000% right. Like, I sometimes say like around AI that AI is not magic. It's just work. It's just
Yeah.
math. Like it's just
It's
people have to
just
do
math.
work,
Yeah.
and
Yep.
then it's math that much smarter people do than I do. But it's really just work, right? And
Hmm.
I actually think that humans are magic, right? Like people have this like view that AI and these technologies are getting rid of humans. I'm like, I don't know. I actually think human ingenuity is magic. And I
Mm.
think that, I actually think there's nothing more human than artificial intelligence because we are creating amazing technologies to push all kinds of industries forward. Like my friend could literally change the entire real estate industry with his
Mm.
idea.
Yep.
And and he is not in the IT group. He is literally like he's like I'm in the finance group and I just thought this is hard what we're doing, right?
Yep.
And it's one of those things that I really think that humans are magic and human ingenuity is magic, and we've now kind of reached this pinnacle where we're starting to build technologies that can drive intelligent behavior and inferences to give back to humans to make things better. And it really can kind of come from anywhere within the organization.
Yep. Um, so Ben, this has been wonderful. I wanted to sort of end with a question. I mean, we've been talking about the future this entire time, but where do you see AI going? Not just this year, not this just the immediate applications, but how do you see it evolving over the next 3, 5, even 10 years? Like, where do you think we're going to end up with this?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a hard question, right? Because I think that there's a lot of futurists out there.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people are selling 10 years out today.
Yep.
So I'm a little careful in how I answer it because, I think the biggest thing that I think can happen with AI is trust. It's like, right now with a lot of the systems that we're developing, we're constantly not just, implementing it's not just about the what, but it's the why. And so we're actually doing a lot of stuff with customers where when the machine makes a recommendation or makes a inference, we actually give them. It's kind of like remember like proofs in school, which like were the worst things ever, where you had to like it's like here's the answer, but you have to prove like all the steps there.
Oh,
We're actually
yes.
showing, we're actually surfacing to the businesses how it came to these conclusions and why it is what it is, what the weights are, what the decision factors are. And so, because I think that transparency builds trust. And so, for me, I think in the next 5 years, I would love for the vast majority of businesses, ranging from a sole proprietor to a Fortune 1, to implement some version of AI related technologies, whether it's predictive data analytics or how can you implement natural language processing into your call centers or whatever, and how can we actually just start. And so I would love in the next 5 years for kind of two things to happen. Every company starts into AI. Number two, I would love for companies to actually be educated on what these words actually mean so they don't make bad decisions and get bad ROI, because that's just going to set the whole industry back.
Hmm.
And so with that education will come trust. And so if they start and they experiment and they are educated and they trust the system, with that, I think that then 10 years from now that we can be looking at a very, very different future where, there's a lot of kind of this day-to-day kind of guesswork that's been occurring that'll be handled by machines, and humans are going to be have more time just go do nothing, continue to push the entire planet forward, which I think is pretty awesome.
Yeah. Wow, so you just made me very emotional. You're right. This is it's an extremely exciting space, and there is a lot of misinformation out there, and a lot of, I mean, it's good to take missteps because, like you said, we learn from that. But it's really, really fascinating just to hear about, where we're going with this. So thank you, everyone. Ben Lamb from Hypergiant, and you can go to their site hypergiant.com to find out, more about their products and services. And yeah, thank you so much, Ben. That was great.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
The Tony Robbins podcast is directed and hosted by Tony Robbins. Anna York is our editorial director and occasional host. Our executive producer is Carrie Song. Jamie Carvajal and Adriel De La Torre are our digital editors. Special thanks to Mary Buckheit and Diane Adcock for their creative review.